Okay, welcome back. Week 8, video 4, functional decomposition 3. Also take 3. This is my third attempt at this one. Okay, so I'm going to look at how we can improve on the refactoring we did in the last video. In fact, hugely improve on it. So just to remind you what the last video was about, hopefully you watched it. We started with a piece of code here, and we showed that if you take any sequential sequence of statements, and by a complete statement, I should say. A complete statement is the statement and any embedded statements within it. So there is a complete for statement, the whole thing. You can't just take a bit of it. That's really what I mean by complete statements. So we take a sequence of complete statements, any sequence, no matter how stupid, which this one is particularly stupid. I took those, no I didn't, I took those lines there and showed how you can make them into a function by a totally mechanical process, pulling them out, calling them something. I chose in this example here to call them silly function because that's what it was. But I can do it, and I can pass in whatever state variables it needs in order to get going, and I can pass back out any of the state variables that it modified in order that the rest of the code runs. That's what I did. Hopefully you watched it. Hopefully you understood it. Hopefully you also realized it wasn't a very good function to extract. I couldn't give it a decent name because what it did was silly, basically. It takes in a value for num for loops, which happens to be 0. No point in taking a parameter that's always 0. It passes back a result that's always 0. And along the line, it also counts for loops. So that bit in the middle is sensible. So, silly idea. Mechanical process was valid though. So how do we do it properly? As I said at the end of the last video, for this sort of process to be sensible, the function should have a role, that is something that can be given a good, clear, unambiguous name. And you can't give that thing a decent name because what it does doesn't make a lot of sense. You should also aim for something that doesn't take too many input parameters and doesn't return too many values. Otherwise, you won't be able to give it a decent name, basically. So let's look at how we can do it properly. If you followed the process in the suggestion in the last video of stopping and understanding the code, then you'll realize that it takes first of all, asks the user for a file name, reads the lines of code, and then it goes through a series of similar pieces of code which count various constructs. So this bit here counts the number of for loops and prints them. This bit here counts the number of while loops and prints them. This counts the number of if statements and prints them, and so on. The last bit does defs. So since those are self-contained blocks of code, they're much more sensible to choose as a function to extract. So let's start with this particular sequence of statements and pull them out. So I'm going to pull them out and I'm going to make them a separate function. Now I've already said it counts the number of for loops and prints them, so let's call it count fors. We already know that's what it did because we understood the code, we knew the function of that block of statements. It's going to need some name, some input parameters, don't know what they are, and following the pattern that I gave you before, it may return something. Does it? We'll worry about that in a minute. So I have to insert here a call to that function, which will in general be some return values equals the function name and the input parameters. So, following the same process, what are the input parameters? Well, they're all of the state variables from here that we need. There's only two possibilities, lines and file names, because those are the only two state variables we have. And it turns out, indeed, that we need lines and we need file name. So this is a bit of a trivial case. We're just going to read the number of lines, take in the number of lines and the file name. And now we can give it a nice docstring, which says counts and prints the number of for statements in the given set of lines from the given file. You could say from the file with the given name if you wish to be even more precise. So it's quite clear what I pass in here now. I pass in the lines and the file name. What do I get back? Remember, we have to pass back any of the state variables that we modified and which are needed later on. I'm going to leave it to you to convince yourself there aren't any, because the only thing we modify is we create and modify that, but we never use it again, so we don't need to pass anything back. Again, pause the video if you didn't understand that bit. So there we go. Have I got it right? Well, let's find out. Monster.py is the test thing I'm using. Count 4s, oh, I didn't get it right because this says count 4 and this says count 4s. So fix one or the other up. We'll do that one. Monster.py. I hope you all just saw the deliberate error when I did it. Seems to work just fine. Okay, so I can then carry on that process and I can pull the next block out, this bit here, which counts the number of while loops. I can make that a function call. I can make that a function call, and so on. I've done it 4 times. I finish up with this block of code here. Again, you may wish to pause the video and convince yourself that that's what that is. It's just the continuation of the process. Am I done? Well, maybe. I've got a simple main function which says get the file name, read the lines, count the fors, count the whiles, count the ifs, count the defs. Sounds all right. Much better code than I had before, at least I think so. Hopefully you're convinced, but if not, you'll get used to it. But there's a problem, but hopefully you noticed while we were going through this that I have got 4 because of count defs, got 4 very similar functions. Each one initializes a count to 0, goes through every line in the file, checks if it starts with a particular word. If so, it increments the count and prints a message. So we can actually do all of those 4 separate functions in one function. How do we do it? Well, the thing that was different in each case was that plus the message we printed. So we print 4 loops and we count 4. The next time we count while and print while loops and so on. So how can we overcome that? All right, well, let's pass in a particular token. Or I think I called it token in the lecture notes, so I'll run with that. Let's count the occurrences of a particular token. So if it starts with a token, then we increment the count. Calling it num4loops, since let me just fix my docstring up. It says it counts the number of statements, of 4 statements. So let's say statements starting with the given token in the given set of lines from the given file. So my docstring is now correct, and it doesn't make sense to call them num4loops. They should be called num statements. So I'm going to fix that, just cleaning up my code really. It would have still sort of worked. At the moment it's going to say it counts that many 4 loops, which is a little bit silly. Let's just, first of all, just to keep the program working, let's enter the bit we deleted was we're going to count 4s. So we've called it count statement. Let's change the name, count and print. Count and print the occurrences of 4 statements in the given lines in the given file. If I do that at the moment, let's just see if I've got the code correct, because there's no guarantee. It says contains 0 4 loops, 2 while loops, which is all correct actually. So it's sort of working, but the problem is that it says it's doing 4 loops. What I wish to do, and I'll just sort of jump ahead a bit here, what I wish to do is to replace that block of code by a call to the same function. So I want to do something like this, count and print while statements in the given lines from the given file. And I want to do the same with if. So let's just repeat that 2 more times. Oops, got the wrong indentation there. So I want that to be if, and I want this to be def. So with that change, I've sort of got a program, but it's got a bug. Let's just see why, so you can be convinced. So if I run this code now and say, whoops, I get an error, count and print if, line 18, syntax error. Oh, I got a slash on the end of it, line above. Sorry. Hopefully you all noticed that. Monster.py. It now says it contains 0 4 loops, 2 4 loops, 603, which is obviously silly. So I'm printing the wrong bit there. The count, I've got the counts working, but I'm printing a silly message. What I should be printing is something like it contains this many of this particular statements. That might have been a little bit too quick for you. Let's run it to demonstrate what I mean. Monster.py, tuple index out of range. Where did that occur? Line 10 in the module, this many for, I forgot to pass in the token into here. So it was not only too quick for you, it was too quick for me. Monster.py, and it says 0 for statements, 2 while statements, so many if statements. Now you probably realise I cheated a little bit here. I changed the spec. It used to say it contains that many for loops, while loops, if statements, and def statements. If I wanted to preserve exactly the same functionality, then I can do so, but I have to pass in an extra parameter. I have to say that when you're counting lines beginning with 4, you're counting for loops. If you look at the lecture notes, they'll explain how to do that. I'm going to skip it in this video. You can see it there. Something else is a little bit funny. I've got some extra white space here, and that's because I've done something a little bit hacky. I've put a space on the end of each word. That's so that, for example, a line starting with format or something doesn't get counted. This is all just a little bit hacky, and I'll leave you to think about how you might improve it. I can fix that particular detail by taking out the redundant space. So now I get monster.py, and it says 0 for statements, 2 while statements, and so on. What I'd like you to do is look at whether you can, or think about whether you can improve this any more. And there's a quiz question here on the subject in the recreational extras quiz, so maybe you'd like to look at that and have a go at that to see if you've really got totally on top of this. This is kind of difficult stuff. It's new to you, and you'll practice it in the lab, and you'll be doing it in the super quizzes. Understanding functions is really the key to programming, so it's worth spending extra time on this lab if you're not totally on top of it. That's all I have for now. See you in the next video. Bye.